Dear students, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the 8th program on Software Engineering 1 course. We hope that the first 7 programs have been very useful to understand the concepts of software engineering. In the previous program, we discussed requirement analysis process and discussed some of the most important requirement elicitation techniques such as interviews, questionnaires, brainstorming, etc. But before the requirements can be analyzed, modeled, or specified, they must be gathered through an elicitation technique or a process such as interviews, as we mentioned before. In today's program, we will explain FAST technique for requirements elicitation, and we'll explain another technique which is called WORD. Both of these techniques we are going to discuss in this program, they are very formal techniques. They specify the way the requirements should be gathered in a formal approach. The first technique we want to discuss is called FAST, or the Facilitated Application Specification Technique. The FAST team comprises of the people from the software development team and the people from the customer team. All these people sit together and try to gather the requirements. This approach really encourages the creation of a joint team of customer and developers who work together to identify the problem, propose solutions, negotiate different solutions, and specify a preliminary set of requirements. The basic idea of this approach is that the requirement can be best gathered if the developers as well as the customers sit together and they try to come up to the requirements which best mention or which best illustrates a software which is required by that organization. There are different names which have been given to FAST, but whatever technique we use, when it involves a group of people coming from the developers as well as from the customer side, all the techniques are based on some guideline principles. These guidelines are: participants must attend entire meetings. Of course, very obvious. We cannot allow the team members to disappear in between the meetings. They must participate in the whole meeting, and rather than all the meetings which take place in getting to the requirements. Therefore, it is a must that all the participants who make the FAST team must attend all the meetings, and every meeting should be attended entirely by each one of them, so that each one of them should be in the clear picture that what has happened and how the requirement has been elaborated. Another important guideline is all participants are equal. That's very important because in the team-based approach, the people who are vocal, they might get dominated and their viewpoint might be more dominant. Therefore, every member of the team must have an equal opportunity to speak. Every member should be given an equal right, and whatever each member says must carry the same weight. Therefore, the people who are too much vocal should not get dominated in the meetings. Another guideline is preparation is as important as meeting. This technique cannot be successful unless all the members who attend the meeting come well prepared. As we'll shortly discuss a scenario and how a FAST meeting takes place, you will realize that the preparation is as important as participating in a meeting. Another guideline is all pre-meeting documents are to be viewed as proposed. That's again very important. Whoever proposes something, it must be taken as a proposal only. Nothing should be taken as a final thing. Because if somebody asserts that no, that's what we want, of course the team-based approach or the philosophy of team-based approach is gone then. Therefore, whatever is presented in the meeting must be taken as a proposal which needs to be discussed, which need to be rationalized, and one needs to come to the consensus. Another guideline is off-site meeting location is generally preferred. Of course, if we arrange the meetings at the workplace of either the customer or the developer, then there might be a lot of interruptions. These interruptions might lead to the disruption of the whole meeting and ultimately lead to the cancellation of the meetings as well. Therefore, it is advised that whenever the FAST meeting takes place, it should take place at a neutral site where both the people from both the sides can concentrate on the problem in hand. Let's see how a FAST meeting really takes place. In FAST approach, initial meeting between developers and customers occurs, and the scope of the problem and an overall perception of the solution are established. Out of these initial meetings, the developers and the customers write 1 or 2 pages of what we call a product request. A meeting place, date, and time is set, and a facilitator is selected who can control the FAST meetings. The product request is then distributed to all the members of the FAST team before the meeting. The idea is that every member should come into the meeting well prepared. Also, each FAST attendee is asked to make a set of objectives that are part of the environment of the system. The objectives that are to be produced by the system, the objects that are to be used by the system to perform its functions. Also, each attendee is asked to make a list of services the system should provide and list of constraints under which the system should operate. That means every attendee must make a list of functional as well as non-functional requirements of the system. Then, in the first meeting, everybody should agree that the development of the product is justified. This process cannot be carried forward unless all the members agree that yes, development of this product is fully justified and we should go ahead with it. Once everybody agrees that yes, this product can improve the efficiency of that organization, it can be beneficial to that organization, then each one presents his own list of objects, services, etc., as he has made before for discussion. After individual lists are presented on one topic area, for example, you might start with the objects first. Then everybody will present the list of objects he has identified, the data which needs to be stored in the system. And then out of all those lists, a combined list is produced by removing redundant entries. Adds any new idea that come up during the meeting, but it does not delete any entry. That's very important. At this stage, yes, we should remove the redundant entries, but any object which has been mentioned by an attendee of the meeting should not be deleted at that time. It should be left open for discussion. After that, a consensus list is developed. Of course, after a lot of debate, whether inclusion of a specific object or services is really required or not. Once a consensus list is produced, then the team is divided into the smaller groups. And each group is asked to write a mini specification for one or more entries. Each sub-team then presents its mini specification to all FAST team members for discussion. One important point to note here is that while one attendee is presenting the list of services or the objects or whatever is being discussed there, at that time he should not be interrupted. He should be allowed to complete the list and the rationales behind the services or the objects which have been included by him in the list. The discussion should only take place once a final list or the combined list is produced. Then all the issues that are raised during the meeting are recorded so that they can be later resolved. The FAST members also agree on the validation criteria. For example, how they are going to validate really that these services or the objects are really the user requirements. Therefore, there must be a precisely laid out criteria to validate all the requirements. Finally, one or more members of the team are asked to write a complete draft specification using all inputs from the FAST meeting and all the lists which have been produced by different people of that FAST meeting. It's very important to note that the FAST really is based on the team approach. All the team members must participate in all the meeting. And nobody in the meeting should be asserting himself too much. Whatever is open for the discussion should be debated openly so that the final specifications are complete and they are really what the customer wants and not those specifications or those requirements which are of the interest of one or two people of the FAST team. The member of the FAST team should really be working on determining the requirements of all the stakeholders and not only the people who are participating in the meeting. Another very important technique which is used for requirement elicitation and a part of analysis is called the viewpoint-oriented technique or the WORD model. This technique is very useful if you are going to develop the object-oriented system. The WORD method is based on the philosophy that a problem can be well analyzed if it is looked upon from different viewpoints, as can be seen from this figure. The problem which is to be analyzed will look at the problem from different viewpoints. The question is only, what is a viewpoint? Different people define the viewpoint in different ways. But we'll define a viewpoint is anything or any entity which is external to the system. You call them the stakeholders. Anybody who is going to use the system, anybody who is going to affect the system in any way, we're going to call it, this is a viewpoint. The idea is that the system should be analyzed from all the viewpoints so that the requirement from all the viewpoints can be gathered together. The major activities of the WORD method are viewpoint identification. This is the first step. Once we have identified the viewpoints, the second step is the viewpoint structuring, then the viewpoint documentation, and viewpoint system mapping. We are going to discuss the first three activities, that's the viewpoint identification, viewpoint structuring, viewpoint documentation, and we leave that viewpoint system mapping until we reach to the system design phase. Now, during the first phase, which is the viewpoint identification, which is quite complicated process where you have to identify each viewpoint, not only looking at the viewpoints themselves, but what type of services they will need, what type of non-functional requirements will be required by them. We have to identify each one of them. The question is how it is done. The simplest technique which is used is the brainstorming technique. The analyst or few people sit together and then they just do a brainstorming session. During that session, they identify each viewpoint, the function requirements, the non-function requirements, and whatever comes into their mind related to that system. And they come up with an unstructured diagram. That's one example for ATM system, and that's the output of our brainstorming session. Query balance, get transaction, these are the services which will be required. And you can see here that we have also included the viewpoints. For example, the manager of a bank, he is also user of an ATM system. The customer database, which will be used to query the balance and to do other transactions on the accounts. The software size, which is basically a non-function requirement. Bank teller, which is a viewpoint, the person who will be using that system. So in the brainstorming session, the purpose is to identify all the services, the function requirements, all the non-function requirements, everybody who will be using that services, that means the viewpoints, and whatever else comes into your mind. See one thing very important here, that we do not impose any structure on it. Whatever services are required, they are just put on a piece of paper without mentioning who is going to actually use that. Therefore, at that stage, you should not be worried too much about that who is going to use it. Once we have done the brainstorming session and identify all the viewpoints and the function, non-function requirements, then we go to the next step. And at that time, we try to put some structure on it. Basically, we try to see which services will be used by whom, and what type of inputs will be provided by which viewpoint, and what output will be flowing to which viewpoint. One example is the account holder. Account holder is, of course, one of the viewpoint. He is one of the stakeholder. What services he needs? Of course, we look at our brainstorming session, and then from there we can make a list of the services which he really needs. For example, an account holder of a bank can withdraw the cash, he can query the balance, he might be able to order the checkbooks, he can send the message, and other services. Another viewpoint is the foreign customer. That means those people who are not the account holder of that bank, but who can use the ATM machine of that bank. What services they can use? They can only withdraw cash and query their balance. The bank tellers, what services they need? They run the diagnostics. If there is some problem with the ATM machine, they have to add the cash, add paper, they can send message and other things. So the whole idea here is that once all the services and the viewpoints have been analyzed, have been identified, then we should make clear that which services will be used by whom. Once that is done, we should also look at that who is going to produce what type of data. The data which can be provided to a system is basically two types. What we call the input data and the control data. The control input or the control data is provided by a viewpoint in response to which the system does something. And of course, the data input is some kind of data which is the information to the system. An example is, this is one of the example, the account holder. The control input which is to be provided by him is he can start a transaction by inserting his ATM card into the machine. He can cancel a transaction. He can end a transaction or he can select a service, what he really wants to do. He wants to transfer money to another account, or he wants to print a pay slip, or he wants to print a mini statement, and the things like that. The data which is provided by the account holder is the card detail. Of course, he might not be punching in the card detail, but he has to insert the card into the ATM machine, which can read the data from there. The account holder also has to provide his PIN. He needs to mention the amount if he is withdrawing some money from the ATM machine, and some messages. So at that point, now we have identified two major things. Number one, what are the services now which are required by each viewpoint? Number two, what type of data is provided to the system by each viewpoint? Once that has been done, once we know that these are the viewpoints, these are the services they want, we go to the next step of word model, or viewpoint structuring. Now, viewpoint structuring is basically a technique which puts a structure on whatever information has been collected in a top-down hierarchical fashion. As can be seen from here, that's all the viewpoints. Then the viewpoints are divided into two major categories: the customers and the bank staff. The customers can be account holders, the customer of that bank, or the customers can be the foreign customer. That means those people who do not have an account in that bank but can use the facilities of ATM machine. Similarly, in the bank staff, we have the tellers, managers, and the maintenance engineers. So all the viewpoints are put in a hierarchical fashion in such a way that the viewpoint which is at the low hierarchy level holds or uses all the services which can be used by a viewpoint above it. So there is the idea of inheritance here. Once we have put all the viewpoints in a hierarchical fashion, the next step is now we should mention the services. That which services which will be used by each viewpoint. Of course, we have already done it. The idea here is just to put all that information in a graphical form. For example, what information the customer can use. He can use the query balance services and the cash withdrawal services. Then the sub-viewpoints, which are the account holder and the foreign customer, we also have to mention which services the account holder can use. An account holder can use order check and rest of the services in addition to the services which are used by a viewpoint which is just above that viewpoint. That means a sub-viewpoint inherits all the services of a viewpoint which is above in the hierarchy. In a similar fashion, we can mention the services required by other viewpoints. So that's what we do in the viewpoint structuring. Now, if you have some experience of object-oriented programming, now this step is similar to identifying the classes and the methods in each class, and how different classes inherit the services of other classes. Now, word model also imposes that all the requirements must be properly documented. Specified templates have been provided so that all the requirements can be written in a consistent manner. One of the example is, this is what we call the viewpoint service template. So these are the headings which you need to write to make your specification consistent. The reference is the customer. The attributes, account number and his PIN number. The events, that mean the control input. We have already identified The point here is that we should put those things in a consistent manner and we do the documentation properly. So just rewriting those things in the templates. For example, we have already identified that the customer input or the events which can be coming from the customer are he can select a service, he can cancel a service, or he can end a transaction. What services he can use? He can withdraw the cash and he can check the balance. The sub viewpoints, of course, the account holder, the foreign account holder, and the customer. Of course, all that information we have been writing here, it all comes from the first two steps we have already done. Then, for each service, we have to complete another template. One example is the template we have written here for the cash withdrawal service. We have to mention the rationale that why this service is really required. In our case, we have written to improve customer service and reduce paperwork. Then a complete specification of that service should be given, that how this service will be really implemented. We'll talk about the requirement specification and how the specifications are written in much more detail in the coming programs. And then the viewpoints, who uses that service. In our case, it's the customer who is using this service cash withdrawal. We also have to mention the non-function requirement. In our case, the non-function requirement is that deliver cash within 1 minute. And we also have to mention the provider, generally that how this service will be really provided, and generally that information is filled in during the design phase. So we have mentioned that how the requirements for each viewpoint should be documented. Once that is done, then the word model emphasizes another important point, that we should also model very carefully. That is the data and control analysis. That how a system behaves in response to events. To briefly discuss our example, we have here a state transition diagram for the start transaction service. Now this diagram is for the start transaction, which is one of the input, the control input. The arrow which is coming on the top of a box show the control information. That is the data which is input into the system. That is the state of the system, which says when the card is present, then the system should request for a PIN. If at that stage some exceptions happen, for example, the system is requesting for a PIN and the user does not enter his PIN number and the timeout event happens or the exception happens, then the system should return the card. So this is the exception and this is the action which should be taken by the ATM system. At that stage of the requesting PIN, more than one exceptions can happen. For example, the card which has been inserted by the customer is invalid card. In that case, the system should return the card. If the card which has been inserted is a stolen card, then it is returned by the machine. If no exception happens, if the card is correct and the PIN has been entered, then that control information, which is the valid card, goes to the next process. And this is the data which goes from request PIN state to the validate user state. The control information which is flowing is that it's a valid card, and the data information is the account number and the PIN. At that state, the system should validate the user by making sure the user has the correct card and he has entered the right PIN. Again, at this stage, if the system sees that the card is incorrect or the PIN number is not correct, then the card is again returned back to the customer. If the PIN has been validated by the system, of course, now the system should ask for the account number and ask the user to select a service. Now the user can select a service. For example, he can select the withdrawal of money and rest of the things. So we need to prepare a diagram like that for each of the control input, that how the system will behave in response to the control data. In today's program, we explain first technique for requirement elicitation. The second method we discussed is called the viewpoint analysis method. Dear students, modeling is very important part of the analysis phase. That will be the topic of our next program. Till then, Allah Hafiz.